It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch on Wednesdays at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. This week, we dig up 1997's The Relic. Now, this movie originated as a novel by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. Now, Preston, interestingly enough, was an ex-journalist and worked as the PR director for the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. Now, the two writers created the FBI character, Agent Pendergast, and The Relic was the first in the Pendergast series by the two authors. Now, the 1997 adaptation, on the other hand, does not feature FBI agent Pendergast. But that's not where things stop not lining up with the original novel. The novel was pretty critical of museums and the American Museum of Natural History in particular within its pages. Now, don't forget, one of the writers was the PR director for that very museum that is getting ripped on in the book. But because the AM&H was so poorly depicted, at the very least from their perspective, they refused Paramount Pictures, the makers of this film version of The Relic, to use their location and name. So the movie had to be taken out of the book setting of New York City, and the producers were really left with either Washington, D.C. or Chicago in terms of museums that resembled enough of what the American Museum of Natural History had. The Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago actually loved the premise of the movie, so they agreed to allow the filmmakers to shoot there. Now, The Relic has a lot of names attached to it. Peter Hyams is directing the film, and Hyams is probably best known for his 80s movies like 2010, The Year We Made Contact, Outland, Running Scared, and The Presidio. However, he had a couple of notable movies before and after the decade. In 1977, he wrote the Charles Bronson spy flick Telephone, as well as wrote and directed the thriller Capricorn 1. In 1979, he wrote and directed Hanover Street, which was a World War II era melodrama that was absolutely panned by critics. But with Outland in 2010, he earned his way back into good graces. But then in the 90s, he worked on a couple of Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, Time Cop and Sudden Death. And then he directed the 1999 horror thriller End of Days, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. So this is a guy who knows his way around a few different genres. Now, producing the film is Gail Ann Hurd, who produced greats like The Terminator and Aliens for then-husband James Cameron. Later, she helped bring The Walking Dead to TV screens. Co-producing is Sam Mercer, who was instrumental in the M. Night Shyamalan films of The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable, making it to movie theaters. But originally, though, this movie was developed by Frank Marshall and Kathleen Kennedy. You know, the lady who's best known for being, a bunch of butthurt Star Wars fanboys' most hated person in the whole wide world, or whatever. She actually does do a really good job producing movies. They just don't like her for the Star Wars stuff. But in front of the camera, we have Penelope Ann Miller, who is a pretty big fan of this movie for the scary monster movie that it is, even when it was not getting very good reviews upon release. Alongside her are the likes of Tom Sizemore, a staple of 90s films, and Linda Hunt, an Academy Award winner for portraying a male character in The Year of Living Dangerously back in the early 80s. You also have James Whitmore in this movie, and he had about 1 billion credits in TVs and movie roles, and until he passed away in 2009. But of course, we can't talk about this movie without talking about creature creator Stan Winston, who's back on Monster Mondays, as he should be as often as possible, creating the monsters here. And as I basically alluded to, this movie was not a big hit with critics or audiences upon release in 1997. In fact, it was released in January, and being a January release even then was not a great sign of confidence from the studio. However, over the years, this movie has gained a little bit of a cult following. It's still not getting spectacular reviews on places like Letterboxd or what have you, but it does have a small group of very strong fans. So let's dive into the mysteries of this particular museum and talk about the Relic. Now, the movie begins with a man named John Whitney. He's in South America studying a tribe performing a ritual. And as part of the ritual, the tribe offers Whitney a bowl of soup. He eats the soup with little or no prejudice, but the soup quickly has a bit of an effect on him. He seemingly is freaking out at parts of the ritual, and later he arrives at the port to try to get a ship's captain to remove crates that he is listed to send to Chicago, but the captain says it's too late. Customs has already inspected the cargo and it's no longer allowed to be unloaded. So he does what all good frantic anthropologists do. He stows away on the ship hoping to find his crates, only to discover that they were not loaded as the captain said they were. And keep that in mind, because this is an important part that you don't realize exactly what he's looking for until all the pieces fall together, which is kind of an interesting thing about this movie. But 6 weeks later, the cargo ship drifts into Lake Michigan and is intercepted by the Chicago PD. Everything about the ship's manifest seems normal. However, the crew is missing and there's lots of blood all over the place. And while investigating the inside of the ship, Lieutenant Vincent DaGosta of the Chicago PD finds the bodies in the bilge water at the bottom of the ship. Now, another week later, we meet Margot Green, an evolutionary biologist at the Field Museum of Natural History. She's up for a grant, but a rival researcher has also applied for that from the same person. And that morning, the same cargo that John Whitney was desperate to find, and to hopefully find on the ship, finally arrives. And she learns from her mentor, Albert Frock, that the only thing in one of the crates was packing leaves as well as a stone statue of something called Cathaga. Now, Margot is uninterested in the stuff that Whitney studied. She felt that all he did was go around and chase religious superstition and then claim it to be on the same level of actual science about the people he studied. And by accident, Margot discovers strange orange stuff. Almost looks like little fish eggs that you see on like various sushi rolls and whatnot. But that's on the leaves. And Albert says that that's likely some sort of parasitic fungus. And later that night, after the museum closes, a security guard is killed by something that definitely has a monster hand. Now, one of the things I do like is that during the course of this movie, that Cathaga creature thing, or Cathoga, or however it's pronounced, it is, there's that statue of it that was in one of the crates. And there's like a restoration person at the museum that it cuts back to every now and then, cleaning it and getting the thing ready to be displayed. And as she's doing that, it's kind of lining up with various attacks from the creature, or various actions from the creature. So that's kind of an interesting thing. That's just kind of a side note, extra like about this movie. I still have my 3 likes later that I'll talk about. But so a security guard is dead. Margot decides to stay at work and study the fungus from the leaves and to add to the possible danger, at least for this first night that this movie takes place during, 2 kids who broke off from a field trip to the museum is kind of sticking around too and doing a little bit of independent exploration, if you know what I mean. I think those kids eventually get out, but yeah, it's just adding a little extra to what's going on here with this creature that's now stalking around the museum. Now, the next morning, DaGosta checks out the bathroom where the body of the security guard was found. And they learn the guy was decapitated and the brain was extracted. And it's sitting in another part of the bathroom. Now, the state of the body is similar to what they found on the cargo ship. And aside from the body in the bathroom, Whitney's office was also broken open. And during the autopsy, the coroner discovers that the poor guy's brain is missing very key parts of it, namely the thalamus and the hypothalamus. And back in her lab, Margot discovers that the fungus on the leaves in the crates aren't just fungus or vegetation, but it contains some sort of animal hormones in the DNA makeup of this stuff. But later, D'Agosta and Margot talk to Frock about this theory that he has about how occasionally there's a large evolutionary jump that ends up creating something grotesque. That was something that Frock kind of aligned with Whitney on, in terms of, sometimes these things that come across as religious superstition are a little bit more than that. And that same day, cops investigating the basements of the museum, they ultimately find a homeless guy who's been kind of hiding out in the basements, and happens to have the guard's blood all over his jacket and the guard's wallet. Not only that, but there's also an ID tag in this homeless guy's possession that came from this South American ship crew. But they found that after they see the guy, and he had an axe with him, so the cops killed him before they could question him. So they're just piecing it all together. So all of this is going on in the backdrop of a big gala event that is scheduled to happen at the museum. Now, D'Agosta believes that this is a little too tidy and not likely to actually be their murderer. However, a judge attending the gala, it's the mayor who's attending the gala, not the judge, but there are several high-ranking elected people coming to this gala, and it's the mayor who ends up calling D'Agosta and is pretty much quick to tell him, it's like, hey, you did a good job, the case is closed. And he might be right to not trust all of this, because Margot soon discovers that a giant mutated beetle was in one of the containers with the leaves and the fungus that she had. And when running DNA samples, it shows that the beetle is, that this beetle that she killed has both insect as well as gecko DNA on the same DNA strands when she did the examination of what was left behind when she killed it. When cross-checking this with Frock, Margot believes two things. First, she thinks that the crate that seemingly was missing something, that only had the leaves in it, wasn't missing anything at all, that the leaves actually were the cargo. And second, the DNA shows stuff that would be created by the hypothalamus, connecting it potentially to those murders that D'Agosta is investigating. But before she and Frock, who, by the way, Frock is wheelchair bound, are able to get to D'Agosta, they are locked in the lab section, and she figures that, okay, well, we can go into the basement and use the tunnels under the museum that connects the basement to the main museum levels. So naturally, that's also where the monster is, and it's killing other cops who are part of the canine unit, searching for whatever D'Agosta thinks is the actual killer, who might be hiding in those tunnels, because the tunnels not only connect certain parts of the museum, but it also goes out into the city as well. Now, later, the creature drops the decapitated head of one of those cops that it's killed into an exhibit in the main museum part, which creates basically chaos. Everyone starts running around and losing their minds. And while all this goes down, the security system gets tripped, and it causes a few people to get trapped inside. 2 more security guards are killed while trying to get the security system rebooted. And despite D'Agosta telling everyone to stay together and take very specific directions to exit through the underground tunnels to the other side of the street outside, naturally, the rich people who are attending the gala, who everybody wants the grant money from, can't crawl through a tunnel, so they need to stay behind with Margot's slimy rival and another cop. Now, Frock and Margot figure that the tribe that John Whitney was studying knew of the fungus, fed it to someone or something, which turned out to be Whitney himself. When she continued to run DNA samples, she figures out, based on the DNA database, that, the human DNA that's in this creature's stuff is actually John Whitney. And then when the person mutated, the tribe hid while the creature seemingly would have starved. Now you see, the fungus is the food that the creature eats. And when there is none of the fungus around, it eats the next best thing, the hypothalamus of a human brain. The creature is some sort of chimera-like creature that resembles the statue of Cathoga. So Margot then figures out that whatever the creature or whatever the animal was that ate the leaves and mutated is turning into something that resembles the DNA of a gecko that she found on one of the strands of the from the beetle from earlier. Meanwhile, the dickhead rival Greg, the dickhead security chief for the museum, the cops, and the rich people are killed by the monster in the main portion of the museum. Cops try to get in through the skylight, but the monster is there to gobble them all up, which seemingly gives the monster a way out to be able to go to other windows and get into other sections of the museum. And I think they kind of missed an opportunity there to give the creature a way to potentially get out into the city as well. But the monster decides to stop off for a quick snack. Dr. Frock. The people trying to get through the tunnels are attacked, and some of them don't make it out. And while Margot figures out that the creature, being more lizard than anything, will likely have quite negative reactions to extreme cold or extreme heat. And she figures first that liquid nitrogen would be a good weapon against it. And at first, that doesn't work. So it looks like pretty bad news for her, but when the creature stops, presumably because John Whitney recognizes her, she then is able to take the time or have the opportunity to start a fire that will eventually incinerate the monster for the end of the movie. Now, let's talk 3 things I like about the Relic. First, I like Penelope Ann Miller as Dr. Margot Green. I mean, I've always liked her whenever I saw her in movies. She was in a lot of movies that I was into when I was younger, like Big Top Pee-wee, Kindergarten Cop, The Shadow. She was even in The Freshman with Matthew Broderick and Marlon Brando. So these were all things that I liked watching when I was younger. But she was also in higher class movies like Carlito's Way, Awakenings, and she was also in the Chaplin movie with Robert Downey Jr. But for a while, it was like she was the lead actress of the 90s. And I don't know what kept her from having a much bigger, longer, and even more notable career, despite being in some pretty popular movies for a solid decade. But I always have liked her, and whenever she was in a movie. And, you know, because she has that kind of, there's a smart look to her, so she's pretty believable as this scientist, effectively, who is studious and more focused on the actual work she's trying to do instead of things like, you know, asking for grant money or going to galas or what have you. She's an actress I saw a lot once upon a time, and now someone I'm glad to see in, you know, like in one of these movies during that time too, that I hadn't seen before. And it's, she's just, you know, she is a very believable, kind of scientific museum type of person in this movie. Second, I like that this movie has a kind of Jaws element to it. The monster is in the museum. It's tearing heads off security guards and ripping their brains all up and stuff. But the museum is doing a gala, so nothing can possibly get in the way of that. Now, I can kind of understand the museum's curator, played by Linda Hunt, in one regard. It's kind of unlikely there is a monster running around. It's seemingly unlikely that even though, you know, you find a dead body in there, I don't think she really knew the condition of that security guard's, corpse. Also, she was running off of bad advice from the security guard chief, who's a real butthead. But, you know, so I kind of understand that, you know, you could potentially, you know, not have a serious problem on your hands going forward. But she's also makes it sound like that if they have to cancel or postpone this gala, that the world would end. So, you know, there was a goddamn security guard decapitated in your bathroom, lady, but whatever. Invite all of the power of Chicago to your stupid gala. But then, because of all of this, when the monster tries to trap everyone in the museum. It creates that panic and absolute chaos, creating far more injuries and death due to people getting trampled and, well, eaten. So I love this sort of thing in movies. It's stupid and not something you'd ever expect to ever possibly see in reality, because you can always reschedule the gala. Also, for public safety and, well, and quite frankly, for, just for libel, or for you're liable for these people's safety. I feel like you would cancel this, but whatever. It really, it helps get all the people you want to see get killed stuck in one particular part of the museum for the monster to have a buffet. And third, speaking of the monster trapping people into particular parts of the museum, I actually like how this movie almost entirely takes place in either the main museum level, the basement, where there's also the tunnels, and the lab portion of the museum building itself. The museum itself is rather large. It's also cavernous. Museums, especially ones that have a lot of anthropological exhibits about past civilizations and whatnot, they often set up the exhibits in a way that creates like these rooms and these sections that are completely cut off from the next exhibit or what have you. And that creates a lot of places a monster can hide, even one as large as this Cathoga monster. And there's a laboratory section of the museum that ultimately has all the stuff you can use to ultimately try to kill the creature. And then you have down in the basement, and that's where you also have those tight spaces as well as the tunnels, which creates extra tension because it's hard to see down there too. So this movie does a really good job of using its setting, even though it's about 99% of this movie that takes place inside a single building. Just a large building with lots of different types of spaces inside to create these different looks and different feels to the various scenes that take place in the movie. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com, but don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Wednesday Film Seizure podcast and the Monday afternoon Monster Monday show at your favorite podcast providers. And we also upload the stuff to YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, we travel to Perfection, Nevada to fight off an infestation of graboids in 1990's Tremors. And until next week, stay spooky.